I'm trying to restore, and I know that you're also trying to restore, like, the love, the light, the good parts of God, because I feel like God's character has been tainted by people trying to hate on other groups of people in God's name. Welcome to the Sovereign Sanctuary Show!
Hello, my name is Sade.
My name is Sonchereè.
And we bridge the gap between traditional Christianity and alternative spiritual paths so that you can customize your faith and your beliefs without feeling confused or conflicted. So today's episode is going to be all about what is the Sovereign Sanctuary mission. And essentially, we want to get into this idea around what does it mean to almost have like imposter syndrome when it comes to your beliefs? Like, what if you have been used to having a certain belief system or faith for your whole life, but what if you're starting to have questions, or what if you want to incorporate other things, but you feel guilty about it, or you don't necessarily know how you can do that while remaining like loyal and true to yourself? And also, how do you do that without feeling like a fear of rejection or a fear of being like not accepted by your peers? And so I wanted to start off, if you're comfortable, Sonchereè, to ask you maybe some personal questions about how you came into the space with your faith and how you may have experienced something along these lines yourself. If there was ever a moment with your journey through faith that you felt like you wanted to maybe branch out a little bit, and what is your story looking like with that?
Yes. So I think I touched on this a little bit, but I'm glad that you asked about like this specific section. Because in the last episode, I did mention that I was, I think, the only Christian within my friend group growing up. And even though as I grew up, I had different friends, everyone was either like agnostic or atheist or some sort of other faith other than Christian. So that I definitely feel as though influenced my faith journey, because there was the pressure of like, I want to be accepted with peers, especially because I was in school, and especially because of that, dare I say, trauma of the bullying throughout elementary school. So I remember when I moved to a different part of Maryland, and I just told myself, we're going to have friends this time. We're going to have friends this time. So I think that definitely induced some lostness within my faith journey, because I wanted to be approved by others. And that meant subconsciously that I was no longer going to seek the approval of God, seek the peace with God. So that's something that I've been navigating throughout my entire years, adolescence, and then going into young adulthood. I definitely had to discover and shed all the different, should I say, skin? Shed the different skins that I had previously, because I had to put a lot of mask on in order to protect myself, essentially, in order to not feel as vulnerable with the people around me. With that said, I am now at a point where it's like, okay, you only need some close friends in your life. And I prioritize my faith more than the approval of others, which is such a great thing to feel and to live out. Of course, I'm not perfect with it. And I was actually listening to a Bible plan last night about how we're not going to be perfect within this lifetime, which was a good reminder, because there's always going to be different things that we experience that are going to enhance our growth within our lifetime with God. So I just am so in awe and I'm really happy that I'm finally experiencing this in my life.
That's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I'm curious too, if you're comfortable to speak to this. I know that you have had like curiosity or interest in the past around things like crystals or herbalism, or just curiosity around metaphysical things, that there was like some conflict in your heart around, does this feel aligned? Does this feel like something I'm allowed to do? Does this feel like something that I will be, like shamed for doing. Would you be comfortable to speak a little bit about that, and how you decided to navigate forward with making those decisions about what you did want to include into your faith?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think it all stems from I'm actually a large part of Native American. On my dad's side, both of his parents are Native American. So I feel like ancestry, in a sense, I was always naturally gravitated to that cool spiritual side of me. And even in the Bible, I can read it and I'm like, whoa, does this point to astrology? You know how like the wise men saw Jesus through the star.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, wow, that's really cool. So with that, I had definitely had to have some self grace and acknowledge that God is giving me grace actively as well, because we live in a sinful world, and more now than ever, there's a lot of information out there that confuses believers. I feel as though that's the case. But with the metaphysical part of it, I think that before I was like, okay, let me embed all the different things. But now I think that I will check with the Bible first to see if it is something that I should dive into, because I have gone down the path multiple times of me trying to incorporate different things that I see on the internet and I resonate with. And then it makes me spiral into another death,
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
sin equals death. So I definitely have been more guarded up, trying not to conflict my relationship with God. But with that said, what that brings into the sovereign sanctuary is that God meets us wherever we are, and we all experience God in a different way, although God is the same every single day. So I really am stepping away from being that person of full judgment. It says to rebuke your loved ones, but I feel like we as a nation, as a society, as people, humanity, are being really hateful with our rebuking. And I know that in certain translations in the Bible it says hate people, but I don't think we actually are supposed to like hate people. We're supposed to hate the sin, not the person. So yeah, it's been a really transforming time to have this perspective and live this life with God in mind and in priority.
Wow, really beautifully said. Thank you so much. And I do have a question because I'm not especially familiar with the Bible. I have only just started to explore like biblical stories in the last year, and I'm going to share a little bit more about that in a few minutes. But what I'm curious about is this idea with, hate the sin, but to still like love each other kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. Could you explain to me, does this mean maybe that it's God's job to do the judging or whatever, and that the idea of hate the sin is more of an instruction on how we need to be aware of our own sinful acts, and to, I don't know, there's such a rabbit hole because I even want to get into the idea of sin further also, because there is so much, I feel like there's so much energy and power behind that word, and I know that's a very
Mm-hmm.
triggering word for a lot of people. But yeah, I'll just take it back to the first question. If you feel like maybe it's God's job to do the judging, and that the idea of hating the sin is as a template or instruction for us to like lead ourselves forward or to guide ourselves in a pure life.
Honestly, I've been honest before, but to be like the most transparent, because I think this is so necessary, is that I feel like even though I've been with my faith for the entirety of my life, I feel like I'm pretty elementary, pretty beginner with my faith as well. And even though I have a Bible streak and all that jazz, and I've been involved with the church, I feel as though I can't really pay for a fact if God is supposed to do like all the judging. Because I do know that like we're supposed to help each other along this path and be on one accord. And if we see sin being acted, I definitely do think that we're supposed to pull people out of it. However, I think that we're not doing it correctly as a humanity. Again, like we're very negative towards people, we exclude people, and it makes it so that people turn away from God, which I think is the reason why we've created the sovereign sanctuary, because we don't want shame to be part of people's faith journey. And fortunately, I have stepped into a church space where I feel like I was afraid to go back. I was actually in a hermit season for about 3 to 5 months before recording the Sovereign Sanctuary show. During our first episode, I hadn't gone to church for those 3 to 5 months, other than like my dad's church, but not a church that I considered home church for me. And I went this past Saturday, and there's definitely been a renewal, and before I was so scared about going back to churches after taking such a hiatus, because I've been to different churches during the different years, and they didn't have shame towards me. They weren't like, "Oh, where have you been?" They were just like, "Welcome back." And that's so beautiful, and I really do feel like that's a space where God's kingdom is definitely shining through. I know there's a lot of different doctrines that people are embedding into their churches, which makes people feel as though God can't be with them. But that's a lie. That's the enemy's lie that he's trying to program into every human being, which is so heartbreaking. However, I think that making this space for people can help them acknowledge that God just wants everyone. God, it has such a full, unlimited heart, and he wants everyone to come to his kingdom. That's why he sent Jesus, so that he can redeem us through his blood. So, yeah.
That's so lovely. So lovely. And especially what you said about dissolving, like what we're doing here is dissolving shame from people's faith journey. Just mwah. Absolutely. Because, and you also used the word exclude, that not wanting to have this exclusionary energy around faith. And that's kind of where I'm coming from with my story and my journey, because I come from a background that I was raised in an environment that was very semi-pagan, very matriarchal, and very much this kind of almost toxic feminist kind of space that was very down with Christianity, that the church and all of that is just judgment and look at the history of what's been all the wars in the name of Christianity. And like I was indoctrinated into a very like hateful perspective. But then it was interesting because as a kid, like I would go to church with my friend, like if I went and like slept over at her house, on Saturday night, and we would go to church, or we would go to Bible school together or something. And at first I was very, very afraid, and I felt like I'm going to be judged. I'm not going to belong. This is going to be very scary. And I was terrified, and I was like, I'm not going to be able to do it right. Like they're going to know that I'm the wolf in sheep's clothing or something. But then as soon as I was in that space, I was like, this is fun. This is a
Yeah.
great time. Everyone's nice. We're singing. We are drinking Capri Sun. We're, like, we're doing art and watching Veggie Tales, and I'm learning some really cool stories. And and to this day, those are very, very like warm memories that I have of the few times that I did go to church. And so in the last few years, I've like started to find myself really like shedding those skins, like you said, of the past selves that held a lot of animosity towards Christianity, or just like programmed, like uneducated programming about what comes, like stereotypes that come with Christianity. And over the years, my own spiritual journey has grown more and more powerful, especially with going through chronic illness. I mean, I know this happens to a lot of people, that they have a crisis in their life that turns them to God, and it turns them to prayer, and it turns them to Jesus. And I found that starting to unfold in my life in the last few years. And I started to actively have a prayer practice. And that imposter syndrome did start to come online for me, where I was sort of like, am I doing this right? Am I being a poser? What is this? How do you start to build a relationship with God when you don't actually, like, for someone like me, I didn't have a past of being led to God. Nobody really showed me how to have that relationship with God, other than more of like a very spiritual, kind of almost new age way of doing that. But then it was also very interesting because in the last few years, I've been going through this journey of authenticity and taking down those masks of trying to be somebody that's like very socially acceptable. And part of that unmasking actually was coming into feeling free to express my darkness. And that is that my entire life, I have been very attracted to like dark alternative aesthetics, dark fantasy, goth music, and goth aesthetics, goth clothing, all of that. And it was very interesting because almost at the same time that I was like, I think I want to step into more of a self-tailored Christian like kind of space. I was also like, I want to feel free to dress in dark clothing and show myself in this aesthetic that feels very true to me, and that I was hiding that side of myself because I felt like I was going to be judged and that people would find me unapproachable or evil just because I like to wear black eyeliner and black clothing. So there's this like parallel of worlds that started to come together, of coming out as a goth girly and then also being like, I want to call myself Christian, and I feel afraid of saying that because both of those worlds are not considered to be harmonious at all. And so there was then all of these shameful feelings coming up of, am I a poser in the Christian world too then? Am I posing as a goth and a Christian, and are any of these things allowed? Am I allowed to give myself these titles? So it's been a very interesting exploration, and really it's funny, one of the things that presented to me was that in order to be goth, you just have to like goth music. And I was like, well, in order to be Christian, I think you just have to believe in Christ. Like, is it that
Totally.
simple?
I think people just complicate it. I think that religion has made it so people don't really feel as though they are safe or good enough to have a connection with God. And it starts with you wanting to seek God. And I feel like I can definitely resonate with what your journey was or is with identifying as goth and wanting that cute aesthetic. I mean, we kind of we're similar with aesthetics. I felt like also a poser. I was like, well, am I supposed to be super duper feminine and things of that nature? And I will say I'm not going to be a Proverbs 13 woman overnight, and that's the chapter of the Bible that speaks to how a woman is supposed to be with God. It's not going to happen overnight. I feel like what is so beautiful about a relationship with Yahweh is the fact that He just wants you. He just wants you, and He's going to transform you in His timing. I personally experienced burnout from trying to be the quote unquote perfect Christian overnight, because I was just looking at all the other people's faith and how they were actualizing their faith. And I was like, okay, that means I have to do the same thing. That means I have to not use fire on Saturday because it's the Sabbath. And that's still something that I am trying to figure out my own personal convictions, because the Sabbath is a huge commandment, especially with the new church that I got into, which is the 7-day Adventist church. And I feel like that's been like the best space for me, and what brought me to have renewal within my faith in such a really powerful way. Oh, and you did mention about how in the past Christians have a really interesting past. And I think that people use Christianity as a tool to oppress people because of how powerful it is. And that's why there's such a like messy Christianity history.
Oh my gosh,
Um
can you say that again?
yeah, because Christianity is so powerful because Jesus Christ, Yeshua, or God, Yahweh, which are the names that the Hebrew names of God, is so powerful. People use Christianity as a tool to oppress people. And I think that's why people have so many opinions about Christianity. And I get it. Like, when you look back in time and you're like, what? That person did that to this group of people and all that jazz. It's crazy. I'm not trying to sit here and be like, yeah, like, we're totally rock on. Like, some people were corrupted within their faith. And that's not to judge. They thought they were doing right by God, but unfortunately, they were probably led astray. And who knows, someone will probably watch this video and be like, Sonchereè is led astray, like, but I think that, I think that I'm trying to restore, and I know that you're also trying to restore, like, the love, the light, the good parts of God, because I feel like God's character has been tainted by people trying to hate on other groups of people in God's name, which I don't think that is what God wants from us. Yeah, hate
Absolutely.
evil, but also teach them. They don't know. Lord, forgive them, which is one of my favorite worship songs. Lord, forgive them, because they don't know what they are doing.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is spectacular. What a profound, you're on fire today.
Thank you.
Oh
Convicted,
wow. Well,
convicted.
I feel very like refreshed by this conversation. I definitely am hoping that everyone who's listening can also feel these words settling into their soul, and Sonchereè was especially speaking to this idea of comparing yourself to others, how other people are conducting their faith and their practice. It can be an inspiration if you feel very inspired by someone's path. It can absolutely be an inspiration, but don't for 1 second let it be something that creates shame or creates a struggle within you. And just know that every part of your journey is being witnessed and being held by God. Even when you feel confused and conflicted and blasphemous, no matter what, God's love isn't going anywhere. And that's something that I would love to speak to in another episode, is this idea of God loving us unconditionally, and not to be afraid of God. There has been so much speech around being God fearing and God being a vengeful God. And while that might be the way that God is portrayed, there is also nothing to be afraid of. There is no reason to be afraid of God and letting God into your heart and letting God lead you in your life. In fact, there's more to fear if God isn't a part of your life.
Exactly.
In my humble opinion, if God isn't part of your path, that's working for you, I'm very happy for you. But also for myself, every time that fear has come up and challenge has come up, having God, knowing that I can go back to God, has saved me, completely
Amen.
saved me.
So
This has
beautiful.
been such a beautiful conversation. And do you have any closing things you'd like to say, Sanjay?
I actually had another question if you're comfortable.
Please
Yeah.
ask.
You had mentioned before a really cool church experience where you drink rose quartz. Is that right?
That doesn't
It did.
that doesn't ring any bells.
Really? Okay.
Like rose quartz infused water?
Hmm.
Is that?
Probably. Yeah.
Well, the only rose quartz story that's coming to mind right now is a very raunchy story about how I was conceived. So unless that was the story I told you.
I don't think so. I think it actually happened like last year? Question mark.
This must be
Maybe?
a conversation you had with someone else or in a dream. Or I have completely blanked and lost all semblance of
Oh my
recollection.
gosh. Oh my gosh.
I want to thank everyone who's listening to this episode, and I want to kindly ask for you to like and subscribe and share if you have anyone in your life that you feel would be uplifted by our words that we're sharing here today. And yeah, thank you, and have a super, super blessed week. We upload every Sunday, and stay tuned for more.
Thank you. Have a blessed one. Bye.